Hey there, it's Tasty Fear here, and I want to cover a bit of speculative lore. So, quick PSA, this is going to have spoilers, as we're talking about a lot of things that are endgame, as well as I have some late game footage playing in the background, so you've been warned. Alright, let's get into it. I want to cover Marika and the Great Runes. We're kind of told at the beginning of Elden Ring by our narrator that the Elden Ring was shattered and all of the demigods warred over these runes. But I think it happened a little bit different than how we're told. I don't believe that once Marika shattered the Elden Ring, that the Great Runes were then acquired. The thesis of this video is kind of more along the lines that Marika slowly broke apart pieces of the Elden Ring in the form of these Great Runes, and that she smuggled them away through siring her children. These demigods, her children, housed these Great Runes, and therefore were trying to tie together that Great Runes require a body to house them in. All right, so we're going to go through some of the evidence for this. Though this is speculative lore, I just haven't seen anybody compile this idea together yet. It's been kind of danced around maybe a little bit in some videos, talking about like Marika and what her goals are. Certainly, Quaylog's got some great videos. AGT Jake, Bandit. There's tons of creators who've kind of covered Marika's story, but not necessarily how these Great Runes aren't related to the Shattering, but instead to Marika's plot and how she puts them in, takes them from the Elden Ring through putting them into her children. We're going to start with what I think was the first rune that was severed in this way, and that is Destined Death. Now, we know that when the Golden Order was established, Destined Death was removed so that Marika could rule in perpetuity, and the Greater Will, the Golden Outer God, would have dominion forever over the lands between through this Golden Order. And to do that, death had to be taken away. At least death the way that it was known in the lands between before the Golden Order was established. So, before the Greater Will and Marika formed the Golden Order, Destined Death was a part of the world. Everything was going to die, was set to die. They had the Birthright birds who would come around and burn death with ghost flame. That's kind of in the explosive ghost flame item. So I'll try and put these items up on the screen when I mention them. That'll include some of the Great Runes as well. So just keep an eye out between the gameplay footage. So to change the narrative of everybody having to die eventually, I think that the the Greater Will, this outer god in charge of the Elden Ring at this point in time, and therefore in charge of Marika, or working with Marika to maintain order in the lands between, taught Marika how to remove a rune from the Elden Ring. Now, I don't think this was a great rune, and that's why I don't know if I would call the Glowmide Queen a demigod, but I do believe that the Glowmide Queen is truly Marika's firstborn, and that she birthed the Glowmide Queen to house Destined Death. As we're told, we're kind of, it's not just hinted at the Glowmide Queen being in charge of Destined Death as Malkath comes and takes it away from her later. But if we're following this theory, specifically the Glomide Queen being a child of Marika, and that is how the rune was removed. So we were talking about Destined Death. I see it more as not as a great rune, but a mending rune. Like we see Goldmask's mending rune, or we see Fia's death mending rune, the Prince of Death mending rune. Where they're not like inherent to the Elden Ring, like the other great runes kind of that make it up are, but is almost a lesser form that can change how the Elden Ring works. So that's why they needed to separate it away, to change how the Elden Ring works, take death away. Now everybody's going to... It doesn't take death away completely, but it kind of creates this everlasting life by being sent back to the Erd Tree. And the Erd Tree kind of absorbs you and keeps your remembrance. How all of that works, we can get to another time. But for now, we're correlating the rune of Destined Death being plucked from the Elden Ring and birthed into the Glomide Queen. So this is a important part of the puzzle. Though runes can be like separated from the Elden Ring in this process, once they're independent, they need a body. Then we also add in that they can be captured once they are independent, which we see this when Malekith specifically takes Destined Death by defeating the Glomide Queen. However, we also do it ourselves as Tarnished many times going through. We fight all of the demigods, we take their great rune for ourselves. I think now that she has learned the ability to do this is when Marika's plot really takes hold. Like a patient coup against the greater will, which her exact plot and schemes, when the greater will, I think, eventually finds out what she's doing. All of that is kind of its own thing. We don't have to get into it for the purpose of this theory. But I think this is now when she begins that coup, and she does it through her lineage. So we'll start with the firstborn, the golden child, literally, Godwyn the Golden. From what we know, he's the only demigod to have a lineage of his own, which ties into this idea because we're trying to track down the great runes and apply this theory to them and the bodies that they housed. So we know that Marika now, in this through this idea, that she can pass down these great runes from the Elden Ring into her children. I think that we see Godwyn's in his lineage, since he's the only one that we know of that has any descendants. Godwyn has Godefroy, and Godefroy has Godric. Or at least we know that they are part of his lineage, and that's when we find the anchor rune with Godric. Whether Godwyn purposefully passed this rune on, or if it kind of naturally happens. He's the only one with a lineage, so maybe that just happens as part of this process. But either way, this great rune is passed down to Godric, and that's why we get it there. It also is important to look at this item as the anchor rune, right? It is the main... it's like the main rune holding everything together. So it would make a lot of sense that Marika would want this to be broken away first. Just because if you take away the anchor rune, it makes sense that it would be easier to maybe pluck away the other runes or start to weaken the Elden Ring from its foundation. All right. Godwyn down to Godric. That has the first great rune. Now we have Morgott and Mohg, the twins. Here, I just want to throw out a possibility that this ability that she has, this skill that she has to take away great runes from the Elden Ring, might be imperfect, as we see that sometimes it seems to lead to twins. and the twins are imperfect in a way. If you see being omen cursed as imperfect, not all of the characters do, but certainly Marika does. And the runes that they get are, if not the same, they are mirrors of each other. They fit together in a way that completes one singular great rune by the looks of it. Whatever the case kind of is here with the twins, we see it again with Malenia and Mikola. Malenia's rot, Mikola's eternal youth. Regardless, these Morgott and Mohg's runes are probably the most important when related to our theory of Marika disseminating these runes through her lineage. So, Morgott's rune reads, "This great rune is the anchor ring that houses the base and proves two things: that the Omen King was born of the golden lineage, and that he was indeed Lord of Leyndell." Lordship here is a very important word, or idea, I should say, because lordship is inherited through bloodline. We see, kings have, their children inherit the throne. That is a lineage. That is the inheritance of lordship. So it's related to the blood that runs through it. It related to the birthright of whoever, that lordship can be proven of. So if this great rune can prove this, it has to be something inherited at birth, or at the very least it makes a lot of sense. We also see that it's the rune that houses the base. It's the anchor ring, and continues our idea of Morgott being the second born. Would make sense that the next part of the Elden Ring to be removed is the housing of the anchor rune. And then we also have Mohg. Now, Mohg's rune reads, "Mohg and Morgott are twin brothers, and their great runes are naturally similar." Why else would twins' runes be naturally similar, if not for their birth? Because it is related to the bodies that house them. They are born with these runes, is what this almost directly says to us, even though that's not how it is proposed in the beginning of the story. So now we have a second large piece of evidence kind of talking about blood connection, birthright, bodies, and the great runes that we see. After Morgott and Mohg, now we get the split of Marika into Marika and Radon. The reasoning behind this split is unrelated to this theory, but it's important to just remember that they're the same entity divided into two. I think that their goals generally are aligned, but even if they're not, for this we're assuming that the goal of breaking apart the Elden Ring is still the end goal of Marika, now Marika and Radon. So Marika and Radon split. Radon goes to Raya Lucaria, marries Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. They have 3 children together. So that means 3 more great runes. The order of the children isn't clear. I don't know if it's important for this theory. My own personal theory would set Rykard as the oldest, Ranni as the middle child, and Radon as the youngest. I want to save Ranni for last, though, because she has the most kind of evidence and interesting story here. So we're going to start with Rykard. Rykard's rune states, "Rykard fed himself to the blasphemous serpent, great rune and all." So we can see his rune is twisted as if the blasphemous serpent is part of it, or like the part of the left side is wrapped almost as if wrapped by a serpent. And this at least goes to correlate the body and the great rune, that they are kind of connected in a way, or they can affect one another in some way. But when it says that he fed himself to the serpent, great rune and all, we're assuming here that the body and the rune are integral to each other, or intertwined in a certain way. So of course, when you feed your body to the serpent, it's going to absorb that great rune as well. It's just kind of furthering our line of thinking for this. Then we have Radon. There's not a lot of clues here. We see that his rune is fiery. It reads that it is wreathed in fire to resist the encroachment of rot. And this may pose some interesting, if not unrelated, questions, but we know that his rune is, or that his body is intact. He has his great rune. It stays in line with the theory if it doesn't give us any direct evidence for it. And then we have Ranni. She has certainly one of the more interesting possibilities. So we know that during the Night of the Black Knives, Ranni had her body slain. This plot was put into motion to get rid of the Greater Will's influence on her. And as an outer god in control of the Elden Ring at the moment, it makes sense that the Greater Will could exert some of its influence through the Great Runes broken apart from the Elden Ring. And I think that's why Ranni has her body killed, why she needs her body killed to help free her from the plans of the Greater Will. By slaying her body, she discards of her great rune, which we know through Gideon's dialogue and eventually Ranni herself that she discarded her great rune. And the other main thing that we know she discarded was her flesh. Ranni deserves her own video because I do believe we see her rune again in the Rune of the Unborn housed in Renala's egg. But for now, the most important part is that she discarded of her flesh. It makes sense that that is also how she discarded of her great rune. This is also probably a good point to just mention that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Ranni to have sought out a great rune in this war of the Shattering, as we're kind of told, if she's so extremely against them. Why would she get the great rune only to discard of it later? Just to add another point in why, or evidence towards them being, the great runes being birthed into Marika's children instead of broken apart in one fell swoop. So, finally, we have Malenia and Miquella, the prodigal twins born to Marika and Radon. There's not as much here. Miquella is MIA. We don't have his great rune to look at. And Malenia's doesn't say much about anything that we're kind of talking about in this theory, although it is seemingly infected with rot, and so visually mimics her body. So it does kind of continue that line of thinking, bodies, runes, great runes, very important and intertwined. With all of that we've looked at now, it's time to look at the final piece of the puzzle, which is the Shattering. Our narrator at the beginning makes it seem like the Night of Black Knives happened. The Elden Ring was shattered, and all the demigods went to war to grab these great runes. it doesn't line up with what everybody else is saying and with what we know from dialogue and items. We have Roger, who is an expert or like a historian or a historian in the making of the Shattering and of that time period in the history of the Lands Between. He says about the Night of the Black Knives that it happened during the golden age of the Erdtree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade, and on a bitter night, murdered Godwyn the Golden. That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering. So, he implies, by saying, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring, the Night of Black Knives took place. Or, at the very least, that the fragment of death was stolen from Malekith. It gives us an idea that there's a lot of time between these events. So by reminding us that this isn't a situation where one thing happens, a year later the next thing happens, a couple months later the next thing, if even that, there's just a lot more time involved in the history of the Lands Between than we're told at the beginning. And the way that we understand it and experience it as a player in this game, while we're going through, all of this has happened, and it almost gets lumped together in that's the past, the history of the Land Between, this one item. But there's lots of time and many events that take place throughout this period of history in the Lands Between. So that helps us understand that at the beginning, the narrator's wording is a little disingenuous or misleading, maybe, and continues to support this theory that Marika is breaking off these great runes and sending them, disseminating them through her children. So we're going to look at Marika now, and we see this is one of the more physical body to rune correlations. She shatters her great rune, and or she shatters the Elden Ring, which she houses, she embodies. That's almost like her own great rune, and therefore shatters herself, her body. That's why when we find her, she is broken apart, this shattered kind of husk, and we see the Elden Ring inside of her. I also think that this kind of hints towards what the demigods were actually warring over after the Shattering, because we do know that there was a war. But if we're saying that the great runes are passed down to them, then it wouldn't make sense for them to... They would have still needed something to fight over. And so I think we see these in the rune arcs. These items have just an innate ability to grant to you quite a bit of power, especially if you have a great rune. It kind of activates it. And I think that these arcs mirror the arc that she is crucified on, that is somehow either a great rune or part of the Elden Ring that she still housed. So when she shattered that, it sent bits of it everywhere. That's what the demigods went to war over. All right. That's kind of the final little piece to this theory crafting experiment. It covers pretty much all my understanding on these great runes and this idea that they are passed down from Marika to her children through Birthright. instead of the war that we are kind of told it happens in. I just wanted to throw this idea out as a maybe semi-cohesive idea, theory, so we could kind of talk about it. I know there's a lot of lore out there. There's plenty of people speculating on all types of stuff. But I just thought that this would be an interesting take on Marika, her children, and the Great Runes, and how they are all related. So let me know what you think. I would love to cover Ronnie and how I believe her rune ended up in the Amber Egg. Or I was thinking maybe covering the 8 Outer Gods and the primeval current, glintstone current, and how that all relates to space and what that means for the lands between. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this bit of theory craft with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.